We have to acknowledge a very important anniversary. 1 year ago, today, Bernie Sanders and his mittens eclipsed President Joe Biden's inauguration. There was absolutely no contest, folks. But instead of doing a deep dive on where those mittens are today, we figured we'd take a look at the president's goals and what he's done to meet those goals 365 days after taking office. We are 1 year into the Biden presidency, and in many ways, that first year for the administration has been defined by how the US projects its power globally, from international conflict to climate to COVID. So we're looking back at promises the president made on American policy and whether those promises have been met in year one. While he's checked some of the boxes, like rejoining the Paris Climate Accord that former President Donald Trump ditched, or ending support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen, President Biden is still working on quite a few other foreign policy challenges.
War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking. We were attacked. We went to war with clear goals. We achieved those objectives. Bin Laden is dead, and Al-Qaeda is degraded in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's time to end the forever war.
A major campaign promise for Biden was ending American involvement in long-running wars. And while a messy and violent Afghanistan withdrawal did end one forever war, there are still plenty of US troops on the ground elsewhere in the world like Iraq and Syria. And those troops are still subject to attacks from groups like Iranian-backed militias. There have also been some hiccups with another key campaign promise: getting the US and Iran back in sync on a nuclear deal. Then President Trump had pulled out of the previous nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, back in 2018. He never managed to negotiate another deal with them, and Iran drifted away from the original restrictions.
I think we're continuing to suffer from the very bad judgments that President Trump made in pulling out of the JCPOA. And so that's one issue, and that issue is going to depend on whether and how that gets resolved is going to depend on their action and the willingness of our friends who were part of the original agreement to stick with us and make sure there's a price to pay economically for them to fail to come back.
Biden promised to bring Iran back into the fold, but after multiple rounds of talks, things have mostly stalled. Speaking of diplomacy with pariah states, North Korea has been somewhat of a mixed bag too. While Biden committed to staying away from the personal diplomacy style Trump had used in the past, he hasn't had much luck getting any kind of engagement out of Pyongyang on denuclearization. Just recently, his administration slapped new sanctions on North Korea's weapons program after multiple missile launches that it says violated UN Security Council resolutions. Overall, the Biden White House has brought a new focus to pushing back against authoritarian and anti-democracy trends worldwide, particularly in Hungary, the Philippines, and Russia. The US convened a virtual summit for democracy in late 2021 that was meant to confront these kinds of autocratic trends, though there weren't a whole lot of concrete results that came out of it. Outside of the summit, the Biden administration has certainly done a lot more finger-wagging at countries seen to be breaking democratic norms. Officials in Belarus's government received a host of sanctions after their heavy-handed response to protests there in early 2021. And right before the summit, the US announced sanctions on a dozen government officials from Uganda, China, Belarus, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Mexico for violating human rights. Still, in their annual global report, Human Rights Watch pointed out that the Biden administration has continued to help prop up some human rights abusers worldwide by approving weapons sales, including to Egypt, the Philippines, and Saudi Arabia, putting another wrinkle in Biden's stated goal of standing up for democracy abroad.
And there's a need for visionary leadership of the magnitude required to address the problems of today. There's a need to rise to that occasion. And we admit today's democratic leaders are not doing that. And if they continue to fail, that's going to breed the kind of despair and disillusionment that will give the autocrats a second chance.
So that covers foreign policy, but we also wanted to check in on immigration. President Biden made a lot of promises on the campaign trail to roll back many Trump-era immigration policies. Did he stick to them? National correspondent Ben Shamiso looks into it.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Hours after being sworn in, President Biden signed 6 immigration executive orders promising to change course on his predecessor and vowing, in his words, to restore humanity to the system. 1 year later, it's a mixed bag, especially from the point of view of immigrant activists like DACA recipient Juliana Macedo do Nascimento.
We were full of hope for all the promises that he had made, and now we see that they're not willing to do what it takes to protect us.
President Biden's honeymoon didn't last long. In March, he was caught flat-footed by a historic surge of migrants, driven in part by the belief that he would welcome them.
They're still in reactive crisis mode. Some of that by the arrivals, for example, with the Haitians. Some of it's due to court orders.
Many of his campaign promises have either been blocked in court or abandoned altogether. As a result, two signature Trump administration asylum policies remain partly in place. The Remain in Mexico program for people seeking asylum in the US, and Title 42, a pandemic order that allows border agents to swiftly expel migrants without screening their asylum claims.
Now, we have to say that they're Biden policies because he hasn't really done enough to get rid of them.
Yet, the administration has made many changes, from limiting the number of undocumented immigrants vulnerable to arrest, to adding temporary protections for hundreds of thousands of people, to raising the refugee cap. But those changes have mostly flown under the radar because the president has failed to deliver on two key promises: rebuilding the asylum system and legalizing millions of undocumented immigrants. Congress hasn't helped and is even less likely to do so in an election year. Republicans say President Biden's more open approach to immigration has threatened national security, and polling shows most Americans disapprove of the way he is handling it. Still, pro-immigration activists remain hopeful.
Our people are just waiting on him to follow through on his promises. And that if he does so, then we will show up.
Ben Chamisso, Newsy.